everybody. Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 492. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's your car, buddy? I saw a picture on Twitter that did not lead me to believe it was in good shape.
Yeah, I got a knock on my door this afternoon, and I opened it, and it was like, "Hey, I'm your neighbor. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you. All right, so I hit your car." Which was parked in front of my house. Yeah,
it sucks, man.
Yeah, it's not like totaled, but the front bumper came off, and there's a huge scratch on the side of the car as well. So yeah, you can see it on Twitter. It does not look pretty. It's going to be annoying. I'm not going to be really out of pocket because my neighbor was a stand-up guy. Came and said, "Hey, I did this," so their insurance company is going to take care of it, but. I consider it a cost to have to spend time on the phone with an insurance company. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, that's for sure. Still honestly, pretty awesome that your neighbor came forward, because so many times people just leave.
Oh, yeah. And the difference is, like, if I came out and my car was destroyed and there was no one around and I was just like, what? Ugh, this would be horrible. This at least is like, it's annoying, but it happens. Like, because, my neighbor was, honorable enough to say that. Also, it's literally my next door neighbor, so I think that is probably a good long-term play too.
Would you have done it?
Yeah. I'm not interested in grifting someone for $1,000 or whatever.
I'll tell you what, that would have been an easy genius or grifter.
Yeah, genius or grifter.
Yeah. All right. Well, this week on the show, we've got the War of the Spark archetype breakdowns. We're going to break down the decks that Luis and I have been drafting and having the most success with so far in a very detailed manner. First things first, though, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all things Magic related, including War of the Spark, which you can order right now. Plus, there's always a lot going on with CFB. The Discord. I'm going to check out channelfireball.com/Discord. You can hop in there for all of your Magic discussion needs. All types of stuff going on in there. I remember you did was it an AMA or some type of question and answer thing when it first launched?
Yeah. And, I check out the Discord too. I'm a member of many Discords. That is one of them. And I can be found to lurk there. I did an AMA when we launched it, and we've had like Nassif do an AMA. Like we have a lot of the Channel Fireball contributors kind of hanging out there too.
There you go. And also, you can sign up for the Channel Fireball newsletter. That's at, I'll put a link in the show notes for that. You can click on the link and sign up for the newsletter. And what do they get if they sign up? Well, extremely insightful content.
I do write the newsletter every week, and I do try to make it interesting. Like, for example, this week's newsletter is about how Karn, the Great Creator, is making Modern Tron a lot better. Because Karn for Mycos and Flatus is a cool piece of technology. So we have that, and we sometimes we have special offers and sales and whatnot in the newsletter, but mostly it's so you can get a personalized email from me.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Right to your inbox. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to sign up for the Channel Fireball newsletter. Also got to mention the Patreon, which Luis has labeled Charity Extractor, a card we don't normally play in draft, but I guess we'll play it here. If you like the show, you can help support it, keep us going, keep us motivated. That's at patreon.com/limited resources. We really appreciate each and every one of you who support the show. It means a lot to us. Crackback.
Alrighty.
Let's get into this bad boy here and see what we've got. First card out is Kiora's Dambreaker.
Yeah, very replaceable, but a fine playable.
Yeah. Speaking of, Chain Whip Cyclops, that's the 4 and a red, 4/4. You can pay 3 and a red to have a creature not be able to block.
Very replaceable and not quite a fine playable.
Yeah, same thing. This is a card I've been playing a lot of. Snare Spinner, 1 and a green for a 1/3 with reach, and whenever it blocks creature with flying, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Look, getting out on the board in some fashion, either by removing a creature or by putting a creature out, just seems so important in the format, because it either allows you to pressure your opponent's early planeswalkers, turn 3, turn 4, or it allows you to protect your turn 3 or turn 4 planeswalker with a blocker. And even though Snare Spinner is not really the best attacker, if you are on the defensive, I found it to be quite serviceable too.
Yeah, there aren't tons of great 2-drops, and this one is very good for green. I don't like it as much on attacking planeswalkers. I don't feel it does that all that well, but very good at defending them. Like Snare Spinner into Jiang or really any of the 3 or 4 mana planeswalkers is good.
Yep. Ward Skill, Crocodile, 4 and a green for a 5/3 with Hexproof. Where are you at on this thing? People have been playing it a lot.
I'm fine on it. Like it gets a lot better once you can put some +1/+1 counters on it. So in the like proliferate decks, it can be decent. But I have not found it to be a very effective tool even against controlling decks because they're able to make a lot of amass creatures and usually throw enough material in the way.
Yeah, that's what I found too. It's just not the best set for a low toughness hexproof creature. Next, now this is our pick right now. It's Bloom Hulk, 3 and a green for a 4/4 when it enters the battlefield. Proliferate. Card has we noted it as being pushed early, and it's good. Yeah. Card's really solid.
It's certainly the pick right now.
Well, that was until we got to this next card, Charm Stray.
Yeah,
you wouldn't actually put this in a deck though.
No,
right?
certainly not when there's any stakes on the line.
White for a 1/1 lifelink cat. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature named Charm Stray that you control. No, we're not playing that. All right, now we got a real fight here. Aven Eternal, 2 and a blue, 2/2 flying. When it ETBs, you amass 1. You like Bloom Hulk or Eternal to kick things off?
I would rather start with Eternal. I think it's pretty close, but I like blue a lot in this format, and well, especially if you're in Arena, I think blue is exactly the place to be.
Yeah. Also, I think blue is really a great starting point in general. There's only one color pair I don't want to be if I start blue, and that's blue-white. All the other ones I'm fine with. Next card's good too. It's Burning Prophet. I've been playing a bunch of these. 1 and a red for a 1/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+0, which is pretty good, but quite powerful. You get to scry 1 as well, which really kind of churns you through your library.
I like Burning Prophet quite a bit. I found it to be good in most red color pairs, but obviously great in blue-red and very good in black-red.
That's right. Oh, boy. Wow, we got a real pack here. Bloom Hulk, Aven Eternal, Burning Prophet, now Ob Nixilis's Cruelty to just wipe them all away.
Yeah, you really can't go wrong with Ob Nixilis's Cruelty. -5/-5 for 3 mana at instant speed is awesome. And it even exiles so you can get rid of those gods forever.
Yeah, sure. for the 3-turn window. Okay. What's the second best common in the set if we assume that Ob Nixilis's Cruelty is the first?
I think I like Jaya's Greeting as the second, though I can see an argument for Spark Harvest.
Well, we're going to have the argument right now because Jaya's Greeting is our next card. Wow, this is a pack right here. Boy.
Yeah, this is a great pack. I would still take Ob Nixilis's Cruelty, but I think that they're both defensible. And I wouldn't be surprised in a couple weeks if it ends up being that, our predilections say that red is enough better that you just take the Jaya's Greeting. The Cruelty is a better card.
It is, yes. Uncommons. Let's see if anything can knock Cruelty off the podium here. A Bond of Flourishing, 1 and a green sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order, and you gain 3 life. That ain't going to do it. Heartwarming Redemption. No. This card's been terrible, right? I don't even think I've seen anybody resolve it.
Well, I don't think Heartwarming Redemption is terrible, but it's not in a color combination that wants this kind of effect. I think if it cost like blue-red 2, you would actually play this card.
Oh, yeah. It's
a powerful card.
By the way, it's 2 red-white randomly.
Yes.
For an instant, discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many +1. You gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Yeah, this thing would be great in the spell stack for sure.
But I think in red-white, it just does not fit.
Nope. Oh, wow. We got a good Planeswalker here, too. I live in fear of this one. It's Angrath, Captain of Chaos. So 2 and then 2 Rakdos hybrid, 4 mana total for Angrath, 5 loyalty. Creatures you control have menace. In other words, kill your opponent's creatures or them their planeswalkers or them depending on what your game plan is. -2, amass 2. I really like Angrath. This card, I just live in fear of it. Every time they play it, I'm like, well, can't beat that.
Yeah. Angrath is, I think, better than any common. Angrath is just the fact that it's in black or red and, just a very powerful effect. Good defensively or offensively. This is where I want to start.
Yeah, I'm also taking Angrath first here. Can the rare knock off Angrath? No, it's Blast Zone. Land enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. Taps for colorless. You can pay XX, tap it to put a charge and tap it to put a charge counter on it. You can pay 3 mana, tap it and sack it to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters that were on it.
Blast Zone is totally fine. I think in most decks you end up playing it as long as your color your mana is not too difficult, but it's certainly not better than the good commons and definitely not better than Angrath.
I haven't even played it yet.
It's playable.
I never take it. I don't know. Maybe other people want it for their deck or something and they're taking it higher than I do. I would, though. I would run it. Okay, so we're going to take Angrath, Captain of Chaos there. Let's get into the archetypes here, Luis. We'll just kick things off right away. So we've narrowed it down to the ones that we've been playing the most. If an archetype isn't on this list, that does not necessarily mean that it's unplayable or bad. Draft is still self-correcting, and if you're the only player in a certain color or color pair, you can often be rewarded and still put it together. But this is just does not reflect the tendencies that we've had early in the format, at least. Well, so where do you want to start?
Draft is self-correcting, except if it's run by Arena bots, in which case it's not.
That's a good point. If you are drafting exclusively on Arena, then I'll tell you what. Where you want to start is where we're starting this, which is blue-red spells. That is a woefully underdrafted archetype by the bots currently. You can get it almost every time, and it's a really good deck. So what is this deck all about? What's the game plan?
So the game plan here is, at a base level, spells matter cards and efficient spells. So when I say spells matter card, I mean Spellgorger Weird, Burning Prophet, Augur of Bolus, Saheeli, that sort of thing. This deck is usually controlling, though it can go a couple different directions. It often has a proliferate or sacrifice theme or both. And you can also build it aggressively depending on what your card pool gets, though I tend to find it to be a little more on the controlling side. It's not as much about having a curve of creatures. It's more like, you remove their creatures, play a card draw spell, and kill them with a 7/7 Spellgorger Weird or something along those lines.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. And you can get a few of those curve outs to do that. But generally speaking, you need to get all the pieces in place before you can get paid off for having those spell payoffs. So if that means playing a 2/2 for 3 mana on turn 3, it's kind of hard to be aggressive, at that point. So oftentimes you need to wait anyway, and then it all comes crashing down for your opponent in a turn cycle or two. So
the key commons, I think, so it's weird. Early in the draft, I would take Jaya's Greeting over Spellgorger Weird because Jaya's Greeting is just great in any red deck. Once you know you're in this deck, Spellgorger Weird, I think, does become better.
I've taken it over some embarrassingly good cards.
It's just such a good card. It's a 3 mana 6/6,
Exactly.
And it takes a little warm up time. But so the key commons I would list for this deck specifically in order are Spellgorger Weird, Jaya's Greeting, Callous Dismissal, which I have above even Eternal for this deck. I think that this deck more often is going to want the Dismissal because it would rather have a bounce spell than a 2/2 flyer, especially at 1 cheaper. Then even Eternal, which is still very, very good. Then Tamiya's Epiphany.
Yep.
Then Honor of the God Pharaoh and Burning Prophet. Then we're starting to get into kind of like the medium commons where the ordering is less important because you're not taking them on a blank slate. You're taking them when you already have considerations.
Okay. Honor of the God Pharaoh. We talked about it a little bit last week. This is really its natural home, right?
No, this is the best place for it because not only does it give you a 1/1 for the sacrifice theme, because Heartfire is a card I frequently play in this deck, it's also a spell, but it's also a creature. And that's really important because this is a deck that can have 6 to 8 actual creatures, but also 4 or 5 amass cards.
2 cards that I noticed that weren't on your list, though I'm curious about. One of them is Sky Theater Strix. Where are you at on that?
I don't like that card in this deck.
Okay, and what about Spellkeeper Weird?
That card's totally fine.
Yeah, I tend to play those, so.
Yeah, I would almost always play one. I don't value it as high as any of the cards on the list, and this isn't a comprehensive list of cards you want. It's just not a card I would tend to take early because it is so slow.
Okay.
I mean, I also, do like a lot of the other commons I think are decent in this archetype, especially the spells. Totally Lost, I almost always want one of those.
Yeah, for sure.
Heartfire, I tend to want 1 or 2 depending on how the deck plays out.
Yep.
So for the deck skeleton, I basically never play 16 land. I play 17 or 18. 18 is more once I have 4 or 5 card draw spells, I'll just play 18 because it's really hard to flood out. But if you miss your 3rd land drop, this deck, does have problems just like any deck.
Yep.
Ideally 6 to 8 creatures and 14 to 16 spells. So it's bolstered by the fact that you, again, have Callous Dismissal, which makes a creature. You have Honor to God Pharaoh, makes a creature. You have Tybalt or Saheeli or, Kasmina. A lot of the Planeswalkers make creatures as well. And you end up with a bunch of extra creatures more than your strict creature count. You just want to keep as low on the creatures as possible. One way to tell when you didn't get there on the blue-red spells deck, the more Turret Ogres, Raging Crunches, Kiro's Damebreaker, Invading Manicore, more of those cards you have in your deck, the less likely it is your deck's good.
I know. I end up with the like, I'm like, talk myself into like a Raging Crunch sub-theme a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not where I wanted to be, but here we are.
Yeah, because you would basically, especially once you're like really deep into it, or you have 2 Spellgorger Weirds, like an Augur of Bolus, a Saheeli, and 2 Burning Prophets. At that point, like every time you put a Turret Ogre in your deck instead of like a Lazotep plating, you're just paying a pretty big cost of like, you might not draw it off of Augur of Bolus. It's not going to trigger Saheeli. It's not going to trigger your other cards. And you really end up kind of getting punished because the natural synergy of the deck doesn't care which spells they are too much, but they care that they are spells.
Yeah, this is one of the contentious plan falls in that slot as well. It's interesting just because if you want to know what a true synergy deck looks like, draft a really good version of this, and it's just you're just like trigger, 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 trigger. And then your opponent's like, really? It's like, yes.
And it's obscene. And the difference is, it's not like green-white proliferate where, you know, when one of the things we were talking about that we didn't like about that deck was you put a bunch of counters on a creature, then they totally lost it, and you just feel like all your work got undone.
Yep.
Here, sure, sometimes they're going to Spark Harvest your Spellgorger Weird, but you just played a 3-mana creature and then went about your business. You didn't cast spells on the Spellgorger Weird.
Exactly. That's the difference.
And you end up with just a bunch of material from your other spells that, you know, ends up being totally fine. Some of the sub-themes proliferate. Like, I really love Flux Channeler in this deck. Contentious Plan as well. Powers up your Amass cards and your Planeswalkers, so that works out pretty nicely. Mm-hmm. The Sacrifice package is something like 1 to 3 copies of Heartfire, 1 to 2 Tibalt/Tibalt's Ragers, 2 to 4 Amass cards, and a Saheeli. So, like, basically you want a collection of like 6 or 7 ways to make Heartfire cheaper or like castable, and then Heartfires, because Heartfire, I mean, at its rate, 2 mana deal 4 is a great rate.
Right. It's just you need to have expendable things, right? Yeah.
Tibalt's the best at this. I think Tibalt's amazing. Like, every time I think someone's asked us what the pick is on Twitter where there's a Tibalt, it's Ben Tibalt.
Yeah.
Just making 2 1/1s that are sack fodder, plus you can sack Tibalt himself, like, is really good.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, that is another card that is also a spell, right? It creates a board presence in the form of those 1/1s, but it also triggers everything else. It's just great.
Right. So, you know, I use spell as a shorthand for instant or sorcery, but Spellgorger Weird and Burning Prophet actually care about non-creature spells, anything. So Tibalt or Guild Globe, which is a card I end up playing in this deck a decent amount of the time too.
Yeah, even if you're not splashing, just having a cantrip that triggers all those things is great. And the more Burning Prophets and the more Spellgorger Weirds you have, the more likely you should be to run the.
So one note is, even with the Heartfire synergy stuff, I tend not to play Grim Initiate in this deck.
I don't either.
I found that you can get away with Callous Dismissal and Honor the God Pharaoh as your Amass creators. The 1/1 is just not quite good enough, because this deck also doesn't really want Ancrop Invader. Like,
nope.
It's just, you're not that aggressive, like, you know, like Devouring Hellion either. Like, I don't want to go that deep on Sacrifice. I just basically want to enable Heartfire.
Yep, for sure.
Some combos with this deck, one of the things I've had come up over and over again is Saheeli Flux Channeler, where you have Flux Channeler and Saheeli, you make a token, and then you copy the Flux Channeler with Saheeli, and then you just go off.
That is gross.
You want other stuff going on too. You don't want to just be putting counters on your Saheeli, but like, when you have that going, it goes off pretty big. This deck also does not mind splashing, because Guild Globe is a card you just might want in your deck anyway. And it's just, you know, especially with card draw, Honor the God Pharaoh, Tamiyo's Epiphany, you can kind of afford to have like a Guild Globe and 2 swamps for, like, you know, maybe like an Ob Nicholas's Cruelty or something along those lines. Like, one of the cards I like splashing is Tamiyo, because I think she's just a really powerful card for this kind of strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think this deck's great. I mean, it's worth noting that, like, I've done a lot of drafts on Arena, and the competitive drafts on Magic Online basically don't fire. I've had to wait too long every time I've done those. I've just done a couple. So I've kind of moved to the intermediate drafts, which isn't exactly where I want to be, which has driven me more towards Arena than I would otherwise have.
I know it's brutal, because I don't want to play the intermediate drafts. I want to play the I've always played the 8/4s and then the
Yeah.
competitive drafts when they moved over.
The single limb. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where all the best players are, right? Like if you're,
well, not anymore.
yeah. Now there's 4 of the best players and not enough to actually fire the queue. It's kind of sad.
So,
okay.
But yeah, this deck is great. Just like any deck, it's got a lot of good rares that can go in it, and it can, because it has the natural base to splash them. I do like that as well.
The next deck is, and by the way, I think that the blue-red spells is my most drafted deck thus far in the format. But my second is the next deck. It's black-green, 5-color. I mean, you don't have to actually be all 5 colors, but black-green with easy splashes. I like this a lot. Look, I think that blue and black are my 2 favorite colors. Like, I think they're the individually strongest colors. And you get cards like Obnixilus's Cruelty and stuff like that we talked about. But this allows you to really there is so much mana fixing in this color pair in green-black, while still being a reasonable color pair at its base, that you can kind of go as nuts as you want in many scenarios.
It's got a lot of potential, and it puts itself in the position to take any good rare that shows up.
Yeah, which is a great spot to be in a set like this.
Yeah, which I think is really the most powerful part about this deck, where if you can identify that green and black are open and you can get enough cards for this, the world is your oyster. You can splash even double colored cards. I've been able to do. Yeah.
Oh, me too. And I haven't even felt guilty about it either, because there's so much fixing in here. What are the key commons we should look for?
Still the top 2 are still removal. Obnixilus's Cruelty and Spark Harvest. You just can't really go wrong with them. Bloom Hulk is next, because that's just a solid card, and this deck often does have a proliferate a couple synergies. I like Guild Globe after that. You can basically not have too many of these. It's the best fixer by a lot. I'm not counting Leyline Prowler, which is an uncommon.
Right.
And then there's Toll the Invasion, which is a card that's moved up really high in my pick order.
Dude, I play that card. I play multiples now. I love that card. This is the best that effect has ever been since I've been drafting.
Yeah, just you get a 1/1 alongside your coercion,
Mm-hmm. That's true. It's also the best version of this card, at least that I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, this is more comparable to Brain Maggot than it is Coercion, and it costs more mana, but it has a better effect once it's in play, because they can kill the 1/1, they never get their card back.
Right. Oh, man, it's just so clutch to be able to take away a Planeswalker you weren't going to be able to attack, or their ability to deal with your Planeswalker or their bomb. It's just like those things happen all the time.
Yeah. Then New Horizons as a way to fix your mana. Lazotep Reaver, Spark Reaper, because there's often it's not that this deck's a heavy sacrifice deck, but it just has a bunch of dorks to clog up the board, and then you're like Spark Reaver, start eating them to look for whatever the bombs you have are. Mm-hmm. And then Centaur Nurturer, the 2/4 that gains 3 and taps for any color. I think it's the worst of the fixing, but it's still playable.
Yeah.
And then you have Palm Bright Druid, and then it kind of just goes from there. Like, I think that there's a lot of playable cards outside of that, but those are kind of where I would start. Mm-hmm. So a deck skeleton would look like 17 lands generally. One of the things that's unfortunate is a lot of the fixing starts at 3 mana. Mana Geode, Nurture at 4, New Horizons at 3, Leyline Prowler at 3, which means you can't actually run 16 lands very often.
No, because you have to hit your 3rd land drop. Yeah.
And you end up with, you want to have like 4 to 7 fixers. So like Guild Globe, Gateway Plaza, Paradise Druid, Leyline Prowler, Uncommon, New Horizons, Mana Geode, Centaur Nurture. You want a lot of these. And you also want to spread them out. You don't want 7 Guild Globes. Not that that's that realistic. You want like 2 or 3 Guild Globes, because it's the best one, like a Gateway Plaza, as many Paradise Druid or Leyline Prowler as you can get, like a New Horizons, a Mana Geode, a Centaur Nurture, just so you can kind of diversify a little bit.
Yeah.
2 to 4 removal spells, but you will take more than that. But that's kind of the minimum, because you are playing a slower deck, and if you have no removal, you're just going to lose to something big.
Mm-hmm. This is, by the way, another point for Toll of the Invasion, right?
Yes, Toll of the Invasion really helps there. Mm-hmm. 10 to 12 creatures and like 2 to 4 Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are really good in this deck, and you can take all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, this deck has the ability to clog up the ground. We're going to talk about blue-black in a little bit, which also does a good job, but this deck is fantastic at making it nearly impossible for your opponent to actually just directly attack your Planeswalkers without flying.
And this deck does, it does a good job of snapping up bombs. It can, play any color because once you have your base colors and then you have all your fixers, all these are basically 5-color fixers. So it's not like, in some sets where it's like search for a basic land. These are all just tap for any color. So once you're in that realm, it doesn't matter whether you're splashing, 3 red cards or a red card, a white card, and a blue card. It's all kind of the same. Mm-hmm. So technically, if you're splashing 3 red cards, you could put a mountain in your deck and that'd be better. But like in general, you don't really care what your off colors are, which is good because it means like if you see, a God Eternal or a Finale or something, you can often just splash it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because of the weird restrictions on these things. Like the Guild Globe makes 2 mana of 2 different colors, but New Horizons makes 2 mana of the same color. So you do have to keep that in mind when it comes to the finales. If you're really leaning on Guild Globe, it might not allow you to splash a Finale. But as long as you have other forms of fixing, or if you have New Horizons, then you can splash the Finale actually quite easily.
Yeah. One note of caution about this deck is as much as it is good at picking up bombs, it actually doesn't do that well without them. Like, you can't build a black-green deck full of cheap blockers and mana fixing if you have nothing good to have as your end game. So you can build a red-blue deck without rares, and it can be really good. The black-green deck is less like that.
Definitely.
Your bad versions of black-green, the all-common versions are just going to be bad. Like, they're not going to be great. Like, sure, sometimes you get 6 removal spells, but even then, like, you're still kind of going to end up a little bit short if your 6 drops are, Yavimaya Worms and Tidebearer Giants or Tide Taker Giants.
Mm-hmm. Tidebearer, you had it right.
Okay. But, yeah, I mean, this is a great deck. Combat tricks are unplayable in this deck. Saurons Thirst is not a card I think is very good because the deck...
Man, it underperforms so badly. Oh, it's so disappointing. It's supposed to be a fine playable common, and it just like every time you have it, they have a 2/3 or a thing that you can't kill with it.
Yeah, it's also just you end up playing like 9 forests in your deck because all your fixing's green, so you're gonna play like 7 swamps and maybe one random off color land or something, and you
no, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just not good.
No, one of the cards I end up playing in this deck a lot is Tamiyo's Epiphany.
Yeah, it's a great card.
Easy splash, yeah, and it just digs you so far towards those bombs. And going back to what you were just saying about the bombs, man, I've never had a deck where I'm just like going into pack 3, like, come on, just give me something. I don't care what color it is, just give me some ridiculous mythic rare of any sort, and then I feel like I could actually, take over the game. It's funny because if you miss, like you said, your deck's actually kind of medium.
Yeah. This deck does have that sacrifice package I mentioned where you have like, 2 to 4 ways to like make it a mass token or like the planeswalkers like Tibalt or Kasmina or Teo alongside Spark Reaver, Spark Harvest, and Dread Malkin that are a good way to make use of that. And it's a good way to just like block and sack is a theme this deck uses a lot. This deck also can delve into Proliferate. The most common way is if you start with an Evolution Druid over the first couple picks, but between Evolution Druid and Bloomhulk, you have some really high rate proliferators. Then you have Pollenbright Druid, Wanderer's Strike, which is a card I often splash. And then Courage and Crisis, which I don't really want to play in this deck, but then once you get past a certain point, it's worth playing. And, what that looks like is when you have a bunch of ways to amass and a bunch of Planeswalkers and a couple like New Horizons ways to give tokens, then at that point it becomes worth it, especially if you have some lifelinkers or something. But Proliferate is a fine theme in this deck.
Yeah, it's interesting that this deck and the blue-black deck that we'll talk about later are both the decks that sort of led me to that discussion we had a couple of shows ago about Obnixilis' Cruelty versus Spark Harvest, because I just find so often that this deck is absolutely fantastic at gumming up the board, but often not fantastic at actually attacking opposing planeswalkers. In green-black base, you don't get a lot of flying. You don't get a lot of evasion. It can be really difficult if your opponent sets up shop and just starts going off, especially with one of the rare planeswalkers with the plus ability, where they can kind of, they can just sit there and generate value turn after turn after turn. And you're just like, I can't, like my Lazotep Reavers, my little Death Touchers, my good blockers or whatever just aren't able to get through. And like you said, you're not even running things like like combat tricks or anything like that. So you're kind of leaning on your removal. And what I found with Cruelty is, sure, there's this idea that like you kill their blocker and kill their planeswalker. But if you've done a good job of gumming up the board, then they probably have a board that has a lot of stuff on it too. And if you Cruelty away something and try to attack their planeswalker, it's often not profitable. And then they get to use their planeswalker twice and it doesn't matter anymore anyway. So that is to me, Spark Harvest is filling the need that this deck needs more than Obstacles Cruelty by a little bit. That said, whatever, I'll run as many of either as I can get probably.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that I think early in the draft, you're still just going to take Cruelty because it's just generally better. But this is definitely the deck where in the middle of like pack 2 or 3, you could easily take Spark Harvest over Obstacles Cruelty just because, especially once you have like enough early blockers, you're not going to fall behind. Then you would rather just take the card that kills the problematic things.
Yeah. But boy, again, the bombs, right? I mean, this deck to me is a reflection of two things. One, there is a ton of fixing in this color pair with when you combine the green and green-black base stuff with the colorless stuff. And this is a king set. Right. I mean, you called it, Luis. This is a king set. This is a set where there are actually bombs that are so good that they're actually worth, taking a shot and just hoping that you get past or open one of them late. So, yeah. And by the way, I like this deck a lot. It's super fun. One other note on it. This is the deck that can actually cast finales for the bonus. Like, if you get Kiora with like a land with New Horizons on it or something, and like any other mana ramp, it's just like the mid game. And they're like, I'll do this for X equals 10. And you're like, what? And I've had that happen to me already in the format a few times from players playing this archetype. And it's just like, man, it's funny because, when we did the set review, we're like, and then other stuff that probably won't happen that often. And like, I know what the cards do, but like, until you see that happen, you're like, what? Like, this is ridiculous when they go off with the finale. But this is a deck that can do it. It really can.
This deck definitely ends up in a spot, if it was like Firemind's Vessel and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Firemind's Vessel, sure. I actually, I haven't even resolved that card yet. I don't even know why.
Huh. It's a fun card.
Yeah. It's a fine card. I just like never seem to see it, or maybe I'm valuing other stuff. I don't know. Also, some of the gold cards in this color pair are really good. You mentioned the Prowler. That's, kind of your key uncommon. But one card I don't know if it's good, but I've really enjoyed it is Casualties of War. That's a 2 black, green sorcery. Choose one or more, destroy target artifact, creature, enchantment, land, and planeswalker. I did it, Luis. I got all of them.
You got full amount? What was the enchantment?
I got the full amount. What was the enchantment? I think it wasn't. No, I think it was a New Horizons.
Oh, that doesn't count because you can just blow up a land anyway.
Yeah, but it gave me the option for all 5. So don't I get something? It might have been Prison Realm, but but it had like a Conjurant underneath it or something. Like, I know I didn't actually get full value. I remember being like, well, this counts, but not really. But anyway, but I like that card. It is a nice payoff, if you can get it going. And then you also get access to some really sweet planeswalkers like Vraska, Swarm's Eminence, it happens to be gold in this color pair, but you can also play like Kaya. You can play Kiora, which is good in this one. You can kind of splash around for the others, but these are just like base level. Angrath. And then, this is a deck where Ashiok Dreamrender can actually do some work if you are light on win conditions. You should pick up an Ashiok. We talked about Ashiok before, and we prefer it very slightly coming out of the board in most cases. But in this deck really does do such a great job of kind of just stabilizing the ground that resolving Ashiok, even for just like a couple of turns, can put you ahead where you can just keep the board at bay long enough to win the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a good point that this is where you would want Ashiok.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what's our next one? Black-red?
Black-red Sacrifice. So the game plan here is the same as every Black-red Sacrifice deck since the beginning of the archetype, which is assemble token makers and sacrifice outlets. Mm-hmm. There's some interesting stuff that goes to that, though. You can either play a controlling game or an aggressive one. I found that this deck can do both, which is nice. And it really kind of just depends on the last couple slots in your deck, since the first bunch tend to be very similar. Key commons, once again, Cruelty, Spark Harvest, Jaya's Greeting. I still have Spellgorger weird up here because this deck just does have a lot of spells in it. And it's worse than the removal spells in this deck, whereas in the blue-red deck, I'd rather have weird. It's still very good in this deck. Toll in the Invasion, also great. Then Lazotep Reaver. I like Toll a little more than Reaver. I think that the protection against the expensive cards is just way too good.
Yep. Then
Heartfire and then Burning Prophet / Spark Reaper are both pretty close.
Okay.
Really depends on which direction you're going. And then there's a lot of other pretty reasonable commons for the deck. A lot of the black-red ones, you have stuff like Grim Initiate that is perfectly playable in this deck.
You get your Crunch on in this deck?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Crunch is just totally fine. The 6-drops like the Manicore or the Giant are both fine, and Turret Ogre is actually decent in this deck.
Okay. I like Turret Ogre, by the way.
Yeah, it's a fine card. I just don't like it in the blue-red deck.
Yeah, of course, really something we should note about your key commons here is the one that's missing, right? Which is there's no theft. You can't active treason at common and steal your opponent's
Bond
creature and then sacrifice it.
Is the active treason. I didn't even put it on. I didn't even mention it here just because it's
not even good.
It's 6 mana. It just doesn't really come up.
Right.
So the deck skeleton would be like 17 land. 4 to 6 ways to make sacrifice fodder. So Lazotep Reaver, Honor of the God Pharaoh, Grim Initiate, basically amass cards in general.
Mm-hmm.
Saheeli, you also can sometimes play in this deck depending on the spell count. Something like 3 Burning Prophet / Spellgorger weird slots. Something like 3 Spark Reaper or On-Crop Invader, like 3 drops that sacrifice things for profit. 4 other creatures. This is where you have your Crunches, your Ugin's Conjurant, your Turret Ogres. Something like 5 removal spells. That's on the higher end, but this deck has the 2 removal colors, so you can get that. And then 2 to 3 copies of Heartfire. This deck wants as many Heartfires as it can get.
This is really the Heartfire deck, right?
Yeah. This is the deck that can sometimes get your opponent to 8 and then double Heartfire them, or 10 if you have a Tybalt out. Just throw 2 Devils at them and they take 10.
I've had that happen before,
totally.
where I died from 10. I was like, what the hell? I thought I was stable here. Yeah.
So both Angrath and Tybalt are just absurd in this deck. They're both reasons to be in this deck because they both do exactly what this deck wants. Menace is great at pushing through damage. Tybalt's great at making dorks to sack. Angrath does as well. And then the way you decide whether this deck's a beatdown deck or a control deck is, are your last 4 or 5 slot Raging Crunches, On-Crop Invaders, other creatures that are good at attacking your opponent, or are they, do you have some finishers? Do you have like a Kaya or, a Sarkhan, just like some good rares? And then do you have like Toll the Invasion? Do you just play a little bit more controlling? But those 2 decks look close enough that I think you can kind of end up going either direction and be pretty happy.
Which one would you prefer?
I would prefer to have good rares and just be the controlling version. But if you don't have that, then that beatdown version becomes a lot more appealing because you want to kill them before their rares really start to take over the game.
Yeah, for sure. And leverage. I think that the removal is just absurd in this color pairing.
Dreadmalkin's really good in this deck too. Like this deck is capable of killing pretty quickly. When you play like Grim Initiate into like Raging Crunch, and then you're like Lazotep Reaver, Heartfire blocker attack. Next turn, you cast a Spark Harvest, and all of a sudden they're getting pretty close to dead just off that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the thing that I think is the most difficult is to make sure that you have something that can actually hit them, right? Like if you're sacrificing a 1/1 army or a Grim Initiate or whatever, to get a removal spell like a Spark Harvest or a Heartfire or whatever, but you need to back that up, right? Like if that's all you're doing, then this deck can have a hard time kind of getting out ahead, either on board or with cards, generating advantage later. So, I would look for the Spellgorger weirds, the Crunches, that type of thing to be able to kind of hammer your opponent after you do so. Yeah,
you need to have something going on. The way this deck fizzles is when you just have a bunch of removal spells but no action. Because this deck doesn't have card advantage. Like the closest it has is Honor of the God Pharaoh, which helps you cycle through extra lands. But for the most part, this deck is on 1-for-1. So, sometimes you get a Planeswalker, Davriel, or Tybalt, or Angrath that can get you some advantage. But you could definitely fizzle if you don't have a way to close out the game or get control of the game.
Right. How much do you like On-Crop Invader? I heard you mention it, but I don't have a feel. It feels like it would fit this deck really well.
It's fine. It's better in the more aggressive version. But basically, if you're in a spot where you're playing Grim Initiate and you have some Lazarus Reavers, then On-Crop Invader is totally fine.
Okay. And what about Devouring Hellion at Uncommon? The 2 and a red 2/2 as it enters the battlefield. You can sacrifice any number of creatures.
I haven't really been impressed with that
double
card.
That many counters.
This is that. I mean, yeah, it's good if you curve like Grim Initiate and Reaver into this, or Tybalt, make a token next turn, make another token, then play it, eat the 2 tokens in the Tybalt. But
yeah,
that's the one card that we've mentioned so far that it kind of exchanges unfavorably against removal, where almost everything else does a pretty good job of trading for removal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you maintain that thing that you mentioned earlier with the Spellgorger Weird, and that you're just doing the things you wanted to do anyway, rather than investing cards into it like you have to for the Devouring Hellion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I only had this deck once, and after hearing you talk about it, I believe that the version I had was kind of cleanly in the middle, which is probably the worst case scenario. I mean, I had a Sarkon, so I had some really, powerful stuff for later in the game, but I don't know. It feels a little weird playing Grim Initiate into Sarkon, like that's a strange 2-card combo or whatever to have in your deck. But I did. Okay. Blublack Control.
Yeah. I'll let you kick this one
last
off.
one. Right. So this is a classic control deck here. In the set. This has a lot of similarities to the black-green deck that we talked about earlier in its ability to gum up the ground, right? It can simply make it very difficult for the opponent to attack your Planeswalkers and you, but primarily your Planeswalkers so that you can get value off of them. It also gives you access, of course, to the Great Black removal in the set and the blue interaction. That really matters. The Totally Lost and the Callous Dismissal are important pieces of the puzzle. And card quality is just high. You just get good stuff. There's good finishers. There's a good curve. There's good early action. So some of the key commons, one of the cards that I think is really just ultra important for these strategies is Lazarus Reaver. I mentioned getting out ahead on board, or at least getting something onto the battlefield so that you just don't get ran over Planeswalker-wise, is really, really critical. And Lazarus Reaver is one of the best ways to do that. It also provides food for your Spark Harvest if your opponent plays Planeswalker before you can pay full price for the harvest, which you'd normally prefer to do. Of course, you get Ob Nixilis's Cruelty. Again, we talked about that. Aven Eternal, another just rock solid card that is good at pressuring Planeswalkers and also just gets you a lot of bang for your buck. Callous Dismissal, we've talked about it a lot on the show. We both love it. And this is why. I mean, it's just excellent. It takes care of so many key permanents on the other side. And there's also, of course, Totally Lost, which we talked about a lot on the show as well as a good way to interact. Tamiyo's Epiphany is sort of the premier card draw spell at common, and it gets you deep into your library. It also finds you what you need when you need it. It is expensive though, so you have to really kind of have set up the board in order to take a turn off to cast it. And if you haven't, it's pretty punishing to do so, even though it does get you, up to 6 cards deep into your library. And then Toll of the Evasion is our last key common. Man, we talked about it before. It's just an overperformer in this deck too. It allows you to craft a game plan. It allows you to take away the problematic permanents on the other side when you don't have an answer, and it allows you to protect your advantages, whether they're Planeswalkers or the board state or the cards that you're trying to resolve or whatever. And it does so while still giving you something on the board, which is so critical, and that something just ends up being really important. I've been playing 17 lands in this deck as well. This is just a deck that doesn't like to miss land drops really ever. You can play pretty low on the creature count, 10 to 12, 11 to 13, somewhere in that range. But just remember your defensive speed. This is really important. I said at this show, you have to get out. You cannot just sit there and do nothing on turns 2 and 3 that doesn't affect the board and have your opponent go, okay, I'll play a 3-drop and I'll play a 4-mana Planeswalker go, and you're just sitting there staring at your hand that has a bunch of sweet removal spells or whatever. You're not going to win that game. They're going to take advantage of Kasmina or whatever, and they're going to get you. So you have to play.
Is especially brutal because it makes all your spells that target them cost more.
Yes, and it means that you really can't come back. And if you've ever been trying to play this deck and they go Narset against you, it is not fun. That takes away a lot of your game plan and makes things really difficult. And you just have a tough time coming back and mounting some type of pressure on those Planeswalkers without a card like Spark Harvest or whatever. So make sure that you aim early in the curve and fill that out. the best one is Lazotep Reaver at common, and then Aven Eternal. Those are that's your 2-3 punch to get on the board. Make sure that you're protected and also have at least something to start throwing at your opponent's Planeswalkers. You'd be surprised how good even just the little Reaver does at 2 power. It allows you to attack their Planeswalker in a meaningful way if backed up by a removal spell to kill their blocker, and then bring their 5 loyalty Planeswalker, which went down to 3 on their turn, down to 1, which means they can't use it anymore. And then, of course, the Aven is good at that too because it has flying. And then you can fill out your curve with Thunder Drakes and Tidebearer Giants and hopefully better stuff than that, to be honest with you. You want to try to hit up the sweet uncommons and the more powerful cards. But if you don't, it's okay. You can play some of these more mediocre cards as well. You want 3, you want more, but you'll probably end up with 3 or 4 creature interaction spells like Cruelty, Harvest, or Dismissal. Maybe you end up with 5 or 6. Good, run them. They're the name of the game here for sure. You're trying to leverage the fact that the blue ones are particularly good in the format, as are the black ones. Card draw spells, you're going to need to play them. It gets a little interesting because this deck has a lot of air. We talk about Cab's theory, right? Cards that affect the board state. Now, this is obviously not that type of deck, but this deck really highlights how decks that don't focus on that can go wrong. If you have too many cards like Tamiyo's Epiphany, Jace's Triumph, and even cards like Ashiok that just don't do anything to the board the turn that you cast them, you absolutely can lose the game by playing too many of them or drawing too many of them. It's
funny that Tamiyo's Epiphany both is a very good card, and it turns out just less replaceable or valuable that in most of these decks than it looks like it was going to be.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny. It's just like playing with fire. It's like you need them. You need a Tamiyo's Epiphany or 2 in these decks. But boy, if your draw ends up being like Planeswalker, Tamiyo's Epiphany or something, you can't run with that. You just can't, because most of the time running a Planeswalker, if you haven't played anything to protect it at all, is not a good idea. It leaves you very vulnerable to having the Planeswalker immediately killed, and that is a pretty tough thing to recover from in the format, and that is really not the name of the game here either. And then when it comes to the Planeswalkers, Kasmina is, in my opinion, the best one. Affects the board, gets you value, and makes it difficult for your opponent to interact. And is a great target for a proliferate as well, because you just get the extra token, which is really, really good. And then Narset is very playable in the deck. You will definitely be playing enough non-creature spells, non-creature, non-lands that you're going to hit at least a decent percentage of the time. And then hopefully you'll use her static ability, at least a little bit. And that actually does come up against non-blue decks as well, so don't sleep on it. And then Davriel and Ashiok are sort of in the other side for me. Davriel is a card that I could run, and I'm fine with it. But there are many matchups where Davriel is bad, where you play it, minus it, and he gets killed immediately, and you're just like, well, that's it. And I would much, much rather have Toll of the Invasion in that scenario. And there are many times when I'd rather just have Toll of the Invasion than Davriel. Now, there are times when Davriel is much more powerful when your opponent is trying to do the slowdown thing. Like, let's say they're playing the green-black deck that we mentioned earlier. Davriel is not what they want to see. You're just like, you're going to be discarding 3, or I'm going to have this really annoying win con that you're going to have to deal with at some point if I only make you discard 2. So that's a thing. And then Ashiok. So we mentioned it in the green-black deck as a potential win con if you fall a little bit short on big bombs, splashable bombs or anything like that you were trying to cast. Here, very optional. I would prefer to start Ashiok in the board and bring it in against those type of decks that are a little bit slower, just because Ashiok does not affect the board in any meaningful way the turn that you play it. And that is a major cost when you're already trying to play Tamiyo's Epiphanies and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to note that, you don't have room for more than like 4 cards in your deck that just do nothing to the board. Like,
yes,
maybe 5. Like, you just can't afford to have a draw where if you have a draw, it's like 4 land, Tamiyo's Epiphany, Ashiok, and Guild Globe or something, and it's like, this hand just doesn't do anything. So
right, and that's really important because I think that there's a tendency to generalize about formats too much. Oh, it's a slow format, it's a fast format, whatever. Like, you'll know whether your opponent is affecting the board and doing things. But I'll tell you what. Let's take the deck that you and I led off with here, the red blue deck, right? We both like the deck. It's very powerful, has a lot of synergies, and it's heavily based on commons, uncommons. It doesn't even need a big rare to be great. I mean, if again, look at your opening hand. If you've got, let's say you have a decent little start, right? You're like, hey, look, I got a Lazotep Reaver. Cool. So you've got that, but then, your next play is going to be Ashiok, and then you have a Tamiyo's Epiphany after that. That's your curve out. You could easily just get smashed by that deck because they can use cards like Callous Dismissal to set you back on tempo. And you're already setting yourself back on tempo by playing cards like Epiphany and Ashiok. So make sure that you don't just assume, well, hey, this is the blue-black Planeswalker. I'm just throwing it in the deck. It is not bad in the deck. In fact, it can be your win condition. Absolutely. But it is not necessarily an auto play if you're already running a little bit too much air in the deck. The game plan here, right, is early interaction that we talked about before. Stay alive long enough to take advantage of some combination of card draw, bombs if you got them, a big army token. This does end up being the best color pair for building a huge army token, which I have found to be an unreliable win condition, but it sometimes works. And sometimes you get a Skylord and you just whack them for 6 in the air or whatever. But this is a thing that does happen in this color combo a lot. And then, of course, Planeswalkers going late in the game. You mentioned a few times, Luis, that you liked a few proliferate sub-themes, and that does come up here as well. Totally. Oftentimes, one extra counter on a Narset or on a Kasmina can be a really nice swing.
And it's also just a deck that has the most amass of any combination. So you very frequently have an army in play, in which case, proliferating does get you a fair amount of profit.
That's right. And then one thing that I tend to keep an eye on here are flyers. I have been mildly impressed, not blown away, but mildly impressed by mediocre flyers. Okay, I talked about the Aven Eternal. That card's just very good. But I have been in this deck running cards like Thunderdrake. I have been running, what is that stupid card called? The artifact one.
Oh, Saheeli's Silverwing?
Yeah, I have been running Silverwing in this deck fairly routinely. And look, I don't think that that's a particularly powerful card, but it turns out 2/3 with flying is just enough to keep pressure up and be just enough of a blocker and affect the board and that kind of thing that you can actually run it in the deck without, I don't find it embarrassing. I thought before when I put it in, I was like, ugh, but it's like, you know what? It is not that far off from a Thunderdrake. And it's because sometimes you never even get the counter on your Thunderdrake. So keep those in mind as well. Those can double as win conditions or Planeswalker pressure when you need a creature or something like that. I'd put this deck in the not uppermost crust tier, but in the one right below it. I think this deck is good and strong and it has a good game plan and stuff, but it does lack a little bit of consistency and a little bit of punch based on your draws compared with decks like the blue-red one.
Yeah, basically I end up in this deck when blue and black are both open. It's not that I think that this deck is fantastic, but sometimes you get an Enter the God Eternals, or you just get past, a bunch of Callous Dismissals and Aven Eternals and Oblixus's Cruelties and Spark Harvest, and it's like, yeah, sure. Like this deck does well enough. I don't love the really, really controlling version because I find you have to have a lot of rares or, Kayas or Kasminas to really make that work. But the amass interact, like you said, just interact from starting on turns 2 and 3, and then just pull ahead with your various card advantage stuff. That works out pretty well.
It does. And be careful. You can definitely fly a little too close to the sun with this deck and deck yourself. That has happened multiple times in the format. So keep that in mind. Those were all the archetypes that we had for the show, but I did want to just do a quick check-in with you before we sign off for the show here, Luis, about the London Mulligan. We had talked about it when we were in London and about what it did, but we've kind of had it now for a little while. And like when I've been playtesting War of the Spark with Adam, when he's come over to my place, we've been playing Sealed. We've been using the London Mulligan, and it was in the cube, the Legacy Cube last time it was out on Magic Online as well. Is it going to be here to stay? Well, I wanted to get your prediction on it.
Oh, yes, I believe London Mulligan will be here. It's going to be implemented on, the various digital platforms when it does. I can't really predict the length that'll take, but if I had to bet whether in 6 months London Mulligan was just the Mulligan rule, I would certainly bet on it.
And what's your take on it? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I think the format that I would say is the least happy about it is Modern. Because that's the format is the combination of the fastest decks and no Force of Will. But I think that it's still just overall good for Magic and even for Modern. Like, yeah, maybe it's not the best. Like, it just makes the decks a little too consistent. Like, Tron just turned 3 Trons so much more often with London Mulligan. Mm-hmm. But it's so much better for Standard and Limited. Like, Mulliganing is still really bad, but at least you have a much more playable hand, or have the potential to have a more playable hand than under the old Mulligan rule. Where, look, in Limited, if you first of all, you never want a Mulligan, right? You'd keep even fairly dubious hands. And then when you did, you'd keep any 6-card hand that had 2 to 4 lands in it.
Yep. Because the drop off in percentage was so sharp from 6 to 5.
Yeah. Whereas, once you have the London Mulligan, your 6-card hand, could actually be good, and it's less likely to be so, under the Vancouver Mulligan. So,
what do you see a cost? Am I going to be too likely to mulligan?
No, I mean, I don't think so, because it's not that you end up in a spot where you're mulliganing and getting a huge advantage out of it. You still really don't want to mulligan.
Okay. Yeah. I've been looking at it where it's like, under Vancouver Mulligan, I felt like it was pretty close, but with London Mulligan, I'm like, yeah, no, like I'm just mulliganing here. And I think online, I don't really care about that much. It's only a little bit of extra time thinking, but in real life, it's actually a time cost, that's real, right? You have to shuffle again and all that, go through the whole procedure. All right. Well, that's cool though. I'd be excited. I think that, anything that smooths out those non-games, I'm into, right? Like it is already brutal enough that you still have to try to hit your land drops and curve out and have all the right things at the right time that, when you just don't even get to play in any capacity, that's not fun. And I've often heard people cite it as, well, it's fine because it lets the less good players win sometimes. But it's like, I even think that even somebody who's less experienced in Magic, if they see their opponent just never playing a third land, it's like, well, yes, you did win, but like that wasn't really engaging, fun, interesting. It just happened so quickly. The other person often just concedes really quickly. It's not exactly a satisfying experience for even the person who wins, and it's certainly not for the one who loses. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. Get you to bed and get me. I just got done with my basketball game, so I still got to take a shower. But I will do that shortly here. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Don't forget to sign up for that newsletter from Channel Fireball. Again, the link will be in the show notes. So if you want to get the sick tech from Luis every week, from a personalized email, right? That's what you promised each and every.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to label it.
Well,
dear.
Whatever name you sign up as, it says like, hi, Marshall.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you are a sneaky. You should have told them. You should have said, yeah, I personally write it out to each person. That's
yeah. Oh, sorry. That's what I know.
Because how many does it get sent out to? A couple hundred or?
Yeah, a little more than that.
a few more than a couple hundred. All right. All right. But yeah, you can check that out. And of course, make sure that if you ever need to sell any of your cards, you do that by going to channelfireball.com. They'll give you a 30% trade-in bonus if you'd like to trade in your cards for store credit rather than getting cash, which you can also do instead. Just, get the 30%. That's going to do it for the show this week. We'll see you next time.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here in a sec.
Ooh.
If I saw earlier on Twitter. It's funny that this ends up being Ben S, by the way, even after last week. But hey, what can I say? We don't decide where the gold is found. We just mine it. Ben said that he would run. He wants to run on a platform of a populist platform in the 2020 election. His policy positions are Tron is banned from Modern.
Wait, for the United States presidency?
Yes, for the presidency.
Okay.
His policy positions are Tron is banned in Modern, Broken Bears are banned from Limited, and Hexproof is banned from everything. What would your platform be if you were running for Magic president?
Wow, this is good. I like this. And by the way, that's a pretty good start for him. All right, my first one is no limit to the hand size.
Okay.
My second one is Arena on tablets and Macs.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Do I need 3? Can I just run on those 2? I don't.
Yeah, you can run on whatever you think will get you elected.
Okay, I got it. No more reserve list.
Ooh, wow, you would win in a landslide.
Dropping bombs.
So Mine would be that Cube becomes an official sanctioned format and is on Arena.
Ooh, I like that.
Also, the removal of the reserve list.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
And I think that it might be controversial, but I would kind of favor in limited. You get a free mulligan to 7.
Ooh,
but
that's
only limited.
Interesting. So, but only unlimited.
Yeah.
Okay. I might allow you to be my vice president.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, was that a yes?
I would take shadowy advisor. I'm not as interested in a public facing role.
You're already that.
Yes, I'm more of a fixer.
Yeah. God, you're the Michael Cohen of Magic. Congratulations.
Yeah. No, that guy, he's so incompetent. I'm one of the fixers that no one knows the name of because they're that good.
Oh, I like it.
That or Dick Cheney, who could just literally shoot him in and not get in trouble. But all I'm saying is I need to think a little more on this. But I think that going into what a campaign slogan and what a campaign for running for Magic president would look like, it'd be pretty funny.
I like it.